On this day, the 2nd of January, 1492, Boabdil, the Sultan of Granada, relinquished his sovereignty over the Emirate of Granada. Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon would now take what was formerly the Emirate of Granada. The last Muslim stronghold in Western Europe was gone, and Boabdil would eventually leave Spain for exile in North Africa. The Reconquista by the Christian powers of Spain has started about 30 years after the Islamic conquest of most of Spain. In the wild wests of northern Spain by the Bay of Biscay, a place called the Asturias, that's where the fight back began. And it took many years, but most of the reconquest had been done by the year 1250. By that year, Granada was the last Muslim state in Iberia. Why was it allowed to continue if they were so focused on reconquest? Well, the Emirate of Granada was very wealthy. It was a great place to do trade with, and it was protected by the Sierra Nevada, some of the highest mountains in Spain. So conquering it would not be straightforward, and having it as a tributary state would probably be almost as good. So, around 1250, just after this, the Nasrid dynasty used instability within Granada to take control of it, and they would end up being the longest reigning dynasty in Granada's history. It was during their time that the Alambra Palace was built, that beautiful construction on the hill. It was the entrepot of the Mediterranean. Genoese merchants and North African merchants would come to the ports of Marbella, Malaga, Almeria, and trade from there would go into Spain and into Northern Europe. In 1236, Granada had become a tributary state of Castile. As such, they gave military assistance to the kings of Castile. So, they were, in many ways, a fief of Spain already. And they didn't just lie down and die. They tried to expand south of the Mediterranean. They seized Ceuta, which now belongs to Spain, opposite Gibraltar, but 4 different times: 1306, 1310, 1315, and 1384. Each time, the Sultan of Fez would take it back, and then they would come and take it back. At other times, Castile and Aragon would be on either side of the conflict, helping sometimes the Sultanate of Fez, and other times helping the Emirate of Granada. However, peace inevitably broke down with Castile, and when this did happen, bit by bit, land was taken from the Emirate. It became smaller and smaller, pushed further up into the mountains. Granada, by 1450, because of all the various migrations of Muslims from Spanish territories into Granada, ended up being the largest city in Europe at that point. So this was around the time when Florence and Venice and Genoa, Milan and Rome were doing very well. Paris as well. And this still was the largest city in Europe. So Granada was doing okay, economically, financially. It was doing very well. But then something happened. Portugal started to trade directly with sub-Saharan Africa by sea. So suddenly, a lot of the trade that used to go through the emirate into Iberia dried up. It became poorer, it became sidelined, and it was no longer useful. During the time when Ferdinand and Isabella were the king and queen, they decided that it might be handy to use a war against, or a crusade against, Granada to unite their people, because they came from different kingdoms, Aragon and Castile, both of which distrusted each other, the Catalans and the Castilians. And they also wanted to give their nobles something to do. The nobles had been sitting around for 200 years at this point, not doing very much, not doing much fighting or conquering or getting new lands. They were getting a bit itchy feet. And so they decided, after the emirate had attacked a place called Zahara, near the frontier, they decided there was a great pretext for war with them. They wanted to harness the restlessness of their nobles and send them off and do something useful. And so began the war, a 10-year war with Granada. By 1491, Granada itself was under siege, and on November 25th, the Sultan finally gave in, signing the Treaty of Granada. This treaty would allow freedom of religion within the emirate, so Muslims and Jews would be able to worship as they pleased, but they had to be loyal to the crown. They would be allowed their customs, their traditions, and in many ways it was a very decent treaty. Now obviously, well, we'll save that for afterwards. So, one of the provisions of the treaty was that by the new year, he would be out. So, that's why, on the 2nd of January, 1492, he relinquished his sovereignty, his home, and his palace to the King and Queen of Spain. What happened afterwards? Well, I'm sure you'll know the date, or the year, 1492. This was the same year that Columbus found the Americas. All of those nobles with itchy feet suddenly would have a great new adventure to go on. And Spain, after conquering this small little emirate in a tiny little part of Europe, would go on within a few decades to conquer one of the largest empires that has ever existed. From modern-day British Columbia in the north, down to the Straits of Magellan near Antarctica, from the Caribbean to the Pacific, from modern-day Florida to the Philippines. This was going to be one of the greatest adventures that Spain was going to go on, all because it started with mopping up this one last little thorn in their side. The Treaty of Granada, which had allowed freedom of religion and freedom of customs, it broke down eventually because of revolts and rebellions. All of the protections that had been in the treaty were revoked, and the Muslims and Jews had a choice to convert or to leave. Many left, but many stayed. And it became a problem because not all of them had converted truthfully. And this gave birth to the Spanish Inquisition. The purpose was to root out false Christians, false converts. And one of the things that happened was that many people, former Muslims, former Jews, decided that instead of staying in the former emirate, that they would go to the New World. And so, Andalusian Spanish is spoken in Colombia, Mexico, Peru. And the blood of these conversos flows through the veins of modern-day Colombians and Peruvians and Mexicans. So, the Emirate of Granada, many of their people ended up in the New World. And their ancestors, eventually, would rise up against the Spanish and destroy their empire. I don't know if that's an interesting story or not. I think it is. But there you go. On the 2nd of January 1492, the last Muslim state in Western Europe ends. If you like these videos, come back for more tomorrow. Like, subscribe, and comment.